My name is Daniel Brooks, and for 7 years I worked the night shift as a security guard at St. Mercy Hospital. During those 7 years, I witnessed things that most people only see in nightmares. Patients died. Families screamed in the hallways. Doctors broke down after losing children they couldn't save. I watched people arrive perfectly healthy after a car accident and leave in a body bag before sunrise. Hospitals change people. After enough nights, death becomes routine. At least that's what I believed. Until my final month at St. Mercy, the hospital had stood on the same hill for more than a century. The newest wings were bright, modern, and constantly full of life. But beneath them remained the original building, long forgotten. Concrete walls covered in fresh paint that could never completely hide the cracks beneath. Elevators that groaned before every floor. Pipes that rattled for no reason. Hallways that somehow always felt colder than the rest of the hospital. Most employees avoided that part of the building, not because they believed in ghosts, because nobody liked how it made them feel. Even experienced surgeons refused to walk there alone after midnight. On my first night, my supervisor, Michael Harris, handed me a flashlight, a master key card, and a radio. He looked exhausted. Not physically, mentally, like someone who hadn't truly slept in years. Before walking away, he stopped and quietly said, "Whatever happens, don't ignore the radio." I laughed. "Why?" He stared at me for several seconds. "You'll understand." Then he disappeared into the hallway. At first I thought he was just another burned-out security guard trying to scare the rookie. Nothing unusual happened for months. Every night followed the same routine. Lock the administrative offices. Escort nurses to the parking garage. Respond to alarms caused by patients sneaking outside to smoke. Check every emergency exit. Watch cameras until sunrise. Simple, predictable, safe. Then one Tuesday night, everything changed. The hospital suddenly became unusually quiet. Not peaceful. Wrong. Emergency admissions stopped completely. No ambulances arrived. No patients checked in. Even the waiting room emptied before midnight. I've never seen a hospital become that silent. Around 1:45 a.m., the head nurse walked into the security office. She looked nervous. "Daniel, can you do me a favor?" "Sure. We need someone to check the old East Wing." I frowned. I thought it was closed. "It is. So why check it?" She hesitated. "The motion sensors keep triggering. Probably rats." She didn't smile. "I hope so." She handed me a clipboard with the inspection form, then quietly added, "If you hear anyone calling your name, don't answer." Before I could ask what she meant, she turned around and walked away. I watched her disappear through the office door. Only then did I notice something strange. She had forgotten her coffee. The mug was still warm. She'd left in such a hurry that she hadn't even realized it. I grabbed my flashlight, checked the batteries, picked up my radio. Everything worked perfectly. The elevator carried me down to the oldest level of the hospital. The doors opened with a metallic groan. Cold air rushed inside immediately. The difference in temperature was impossible. It felt at least 15 degrees colder than the floor above. The hallway stretched endlessly beneath flickering fluorescent lights. Old patient rooms lined both sides. Most doors were open. Inside were abandoned hospital beds covered with white sheets. Dust floated lazily through the flashlight beam. The smell was strange. Disinfectant, old wood, rust, and something else. Something sweet. The kind of smell flowers have after sitting beside a coffin for too many days. I checked the first 5 rooms. Nothing. Empty. Room 206. Empty. Room 207. Empty. Room 208. Locked. When I reached room 209, the door slowly closed by itself. Not slammed. Not pushed. It simply drifted shut, as if someone inside had gently pulled it closed from the other side. I stopped walking. My flashlight remained fixed on the door. The hallway became completely silent. Then, 3 slow knocks came from inside the room. 3 slow knocks came from inside room 209. I didn't move. The sound wasn't loud enough to frighten me immediately. It was the rhythm that bothered me. 3 knocks. A pause. 3 more. Always perfectly even. Like someone patiently waiting for permission to come out. I kept my flashlight fixed on the door. Nothing happened. The hallway remained silent. No footsteps. No voices. No movement behind the frosted glass window. I looked back at the inspection sheet. Room 209, permanently closed. No patients. No equipment. No electricity. The room had supposedly been empty for almost 30 years. The knocking came again. Exactly 3 times. This time I slowly reached for my radio. Security to control. No response. Only static. I tried again. Victor, do you copy? The static grew louder. Then, a voice answered. Not Victor. Not dispatch. A woman's voice. Soft. Barely above a whisper. Don't open it. My grip tightened around the radio. Who's speaking? Silence. The transmission ended. I stood there for another minute before forcing myself to continue the patrol. I wasn't paid to investigate ghost stories. I was paid to make sure the building stayed secure. So I walked. Room 210. Empty. Room 211. Storage. Room 212. Locked. Everything seemed normal again. Almost. As I continued down the corridor, I noticed something strange. The farther I walked, the longer the hallway became. It didn't happen suddenly. It was gradual. The exit sign at the far end never seemed to get any closer. Every few seconds, another identical section of hallway appeared ahead. Same lights. Same walls. Same patient rooms. I stopped walking. The hallway stopped changing. I took another step. It stretched again. My pulse quickened. Hospitals don't grow while you're walking through them. I turned around. The way back looked just as long. Much longer than it had only moments earlier. A cold draft passed through the corridor. It carried the smell of old disinfectant mixed with damp concrete. Then another smell appeared. Fresh coffee. I frowned. Someone had to be nearby. The scent grew stronger. It reminded me of the security office upstairs. Victor always drank the same bitter black coffee every night. The smell drifted past me, yet the hallway remained completely empty. Then I heard footsteps. Real footsteps this time. Heavy boots. Walking slowly. Behind me. I turned immediately. Nothing. The corridor stood empty beneath the flickering lights. I waited. The footsteps stopped. I continued walking. They started again. One step. Then another. Always matching my speed. Whenever I slowed down, they slowed down. Whenever I walked faster, they kept the exact same distance behind me. Never closer. Never farther away. I refused to look back again. Instead, I kept walking toward the distant exit sign. After nearly 5 minutes, I finally reached the end of the corridor. Or at least, I thought I had. The hallway ended at a large wooden door with faded letters above it. Archives. According to every map I'd ever seen, there wasn't supposed to be an archive room on this floor. Curiosity got the better of me. I pushed the heavy door open. Dust filled the air immediately. Thousands of old patient files covered shelves stretching farther than my flashlight could illuminate. The room seemed impossibly large. Shelf after shelf disappeared into darkness. Every folder carried handwritten dates. Some were so old they looked ready to fall apart. As I walked between the shelves, I noticed every folder had a red stamp across the front. Deceased. Every single one. Then my flashlight landed on a newer box sitting alone on a metal table. Unlike everything else, it wasn't covered in dust. Someone had been here recently. A single folder rested on top. No patient name. No identification number. Only one word typed neatly across the front. Security. I slowly opened it. Inside were photographs. The first showed a security guard standing in front of the hospital entrance sometime during the 1980s. The second showed another guard from the early 1990s. The third, another. Different faces. Different uniforms. Different decades. Every photograph had one thing in common. On the back, someone had written the same sentence. Last patrol completed at 2:47 a.m. I flipped through more pictures. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. Every security guard who had ever worked the night shift. Every single photograph ended with the exact same note. Last patrol completed at 2:47 a.m. My blood ran cold. I slowly checked my phone. The screen lit up. The time read 2:47 a.m. I stared at the glowing numbers on my phone. 2:47 a.m. It hadn't changed. Not by a single minute. I checked again. Still 2:47. A strange pressure built in my chest. I'd been walking through the East Wing for what felt like half an hour. There was no way the time hadn't moved. I shoved the phone back into my pocket and grabbed the security folder. If this was some kind of prank, I wanted proof. The folder felt heavier than it should have. As I turned to leave the archive room, every light inside suddenly flickered. Once. Twice. Then they stabilized. The shelves around me looked different. I couldn't explain how. They were still filled with files, but they somehow seemed closer. The narrow aisle I had entered through was no longer visible. I walked forward. Instead of reaching the exit, another row of shelves appeared. I turned left. More shelves. Right. More shelves. Every path looked exactly the same. I stopped. The silence became unbearable. Then I heard paper moving. Not one folder. Thousands. Like every file in the room was being flipped through at the same time. The sound echoed from every direction. Slowly at first. Then faster. Much faster. Within seconds it sounded like an entire library had come alive. I shined my flashlight across the nearest shelf. Nothing moved. The folders remained perfectly still. Yet the sound continued. I took another cautious step. A folder suddenly slid off the shelf by itself and landed at my feet. I stared at it for several seconds before picking it up. There was no patient name, only today's date. My hands immediately became cold. I opened it. Inside was a photograph. It was me, standing in front of room 209, less than an hour earlier. I frowned. Someone couldn't have taken that picture. I had been completely alone. I flipped to the next page. Another photograph. Me walking down the hallway. Another. Me answering the wall telephone. Another. Me opening the security folder. Every moment since entering the East Wing had somehow been photographed. The final page was empty, except for a sentence typed across the bottom. Next photograph pending. A loud click echoed behind me. The unmistakable sound of a camera shutter. I spun around. Nobody. Another click. This time from somewhere to my left. Click. Behind me. Click. Above me. The sound surrounded me, as if invisible photographers stood between every shelf. Each shutter fired one after another. Click. 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 I began walking faster. The clicking matched my pace. Then the lights went out. Only for a second. When they returned, every shelf around me was empty. No files. No folders. Nothing. Only hundreds of framed photographs hanging neatly where the files had been. Every frame contained the face of a security guard. Some smiled. Some looked terrified. Some seemed to be screaming. As I moved past them, I noticed something impossible. Their eyes followed me. Every single portrait watched me as I walked. One of the older guards suddenly blinked. I froze. Then another blinked. Another slowly smiled. Without warning, every person inside every photograph turned their heads toward the same direction, toward the darkness behind me. I didn't want to look. Every instinct begged me to keep facing the wall of photographs. But I couldn't stop myself. I slowly turned around. At the far end of the aisle stood a man wearing a security uniform. He held an old flashlight in one hand. His face was hidden beneath the shadow of his cap. He didn't move. He simply stood there. Then he slowly lifted his flashlight and pointed it directly at me. 3 slow knocks echoed from somewhere behind me. I didn't turn around immediately. Every portrait hanging on the wall was still staring into the darkness behind my back. Whatever had caught their attention hadn't moved. The old security guard standing at the end of the aisle slowly lowered his flashlight until its beam pointed directly at the floor between us. Then, without saying a single word, he raised one finger to his lips. "Be quiet." I barely had time to process the warning before another sound drifted through the archive room. A metal cart rolled somewhere beyond the shelves. Its wheels squeaked with every rotation. Slow. Steady. Closer. Nobody pushed it. The sound simply floated through the darkness as if the cart were moving by itself. I slowly switched off my flashlight. The room instantly became almost completely black. Only a weak emergency light near the ceiling illuminated the tops of the shelves. The cart kept coming. Closer. Closer. Finally, it entered the aisle. An old stainless steel hospital trolley rolled silently past the opening between two shelves. It should have stopped after a few feet. Instead, it continued moving without slowing down. There was nobody behind it, nobody beside it, nothing touching it, yet it rolled perfectly straight through the archive room. As it passed my hiding place, I noticed a single patient file lying on top. The file was open. The pages turned by themselves, even though there wasn't any wind. Page after page flipped until they stopped on a photograph. I couldn't see it clearly from where I stood. The cart continued rolling until it disappeared into another aisle. The silence returned. Very slowly, I turned my flashlight back on. The old security guard was gone. Only the empty aisle remained. I stepped out carefully, trying not to make a sound. The file still bothered me. Against every instinct, I followed the direction where the cart had disappeared. The archive room seemed even larger now. Rows of shelves stretched endlessly into darkness. Every few seconds I caught movement in the corner of my eye, a shadow slipping behind another shelf, a white hospital gown disappearing around a corner. Every time I pointed my flashlight toward it, nothing. After nearly a minute, I found the cart. It had stopped in the middle of another aisle. The patient file still lay open exactly where I had seen it. I approached slowly. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. The photograph showed a security guard standing in front of St. Mercy Hospital. It took me several seconds to realize. The guard was me. Not from tonight. The photograph looked old. Very old. The edges had already begun turning yellow. I wore a security uniform I had never seen before. The badge on my chest looked different. Even my face seemed older, as if the picture had been taken 20 years in the future. I quickly flipped to the next page. Another photograph. Again it was me. Only this time I was standing inside the East Wing, looking directly into the camera. Behind me stood dozens of patients. None of them had faces. The next page showed something even worse. A newspaper clipping. Local security guard missing after night shift. The article began with my full name. Daniel Brooks, age 34. I stopped reading. I was 29. The article described events that hadn't happened yet. It said search teams never found my body, only my flashlight, and one final patrol report. My hands started shaking so badly I nearly dropped the file. At the bottom of the page, someone had written a sentence in red ink. You are reading this because it already happened. I dropped the folder onto the card and took 2 slow steps backward. Every instinct told me to leave it where it was and get out of the archive room as quickly as possible. My breathing had become shallow, and I could hear my heartbeat echoing louder than my own footsteps. I kept my flashlight pointed at the folder, almost expecting it to move again. Instead, something else happened. Every photograph inside the open file slowly turned by itself until the last page was visible again. The sentence written in red ink was gone. In its place appeared a new line. Turn around. I refused. My hands tightened around the flashlight until my knuckles turned white. The room became completely silent. No paper moving. No squeaking wheels. Nothing. Then I heard breathing. Not beside me. Directly behind me. Slow, calm, patient. Whoever or whatever stood there wasn't trying to hide anymore. I closed my eyes for a second before forcing myself to turn around. The aisle behind me was empty. I let out a shaky breath, but it lasted only a moment. My flashlight beam landed on the metal shelf beside me. Every photograph hanging there had changed. A second earlier, they had shown old security guards. Now every frame showed me. Hundreds of photographs. Me entering the hospital. Me checking the doors. Me walking through the East Wing. Me standing in front of room 209. Me reading the file. Me looking frightened exactly as I was now. Then I noticed the last photograph. It wasn't finished. The picture showed me staring at the wall of photographs. Behind me stood a tall figure in a hospital gown. Its face was still blurred, as if the photograph hadn't fully developed yet. While I watched, the blur slowly faded. Dark, empty eye sockets appeared first, then a long, cracked smile. Then pale skin stretched tightly across its face. I dropped the flashlight. It hit the floor with a loud metallic crash. Every photograph on the shelf shattered at the exact same moment. Glass exploded across the floor. Before I could react, every hospital speaker inside the archive room turned on. A calm voice echoed through the darkness. Archive updated. Another voice answered from somewhere deeper inside the room. Subject confirmed. Then another. Night shift security. Daniel Brooks. The voices multiplied until dozens of them repeated my name over and over. Some sounded like doctors. Others sounded like children. Others sounded old enough to belong to people who had died decades ago. I grabbed my flashlight and ran. This time I didn't care where I was going. I pushed past endless shelves without looking back. Every few seconds another voice whispered my name from somewhere nearby. Sometimes it came from the left, sometimes from the right. Sometimes directly above my head. The farther I ran, the darker the archive became. The emergency lights disappeared behind me until only my flashlight remained. Then even its beam started growing weaker. It flickered once, twice, 3 times. Finally, the light revealed a large steel door standing alone at the end of the aisle. Across the door, someone had painted 3 words in faded black letters. Basement level access. My heart stopped. I remembered the warning written on the paper. Don't let it reach the basement. But before I could step away from the door, the handle slowly began turning by itself. The metal handle completed its slow turn with a sharp click. I held my breath, unable to move as the heavy basement door opened only a few inches by itself. A wave of freezing air rolled out of the darkness below. It wasn't the normal cold of an old building. It felt heavy, almost alive, carrying the smell of wet concrete, rusted pipes, and something rotten that had been hidden for years. My flashlight trembled in my hand as I aimed it down the stairwell. The beam disappeared after only a few steps, swallowed by darkness so thick it looked almost solid. Then I heard it, a single footstep, somewhere deep below me. Slow, heavy, followed by another. Someone was climbing the stairs. I immediately stepped away from the doorway. The footsteps continued at the exact same pace. Whoever was below wasn't rushing. It already knew I couldn't escape. My radio suddenly burst into life so loudly that I nearly dropped it. "Brooks!" Victor shouted. His voice sounded desperate. "Whatever you do, don't go downstairs." I pressed the transmit button. The door opened by itself. I yelled, "Something is coming up." Victor didn't answer immediately. I heard papers being thrown around, drawers opening, people shouting in the background. Finally, he spoke again, breathing heavily. "Listen carefully. Do you remember the old blueprints in the security office?" "Yeah. The basement shown on those maps doesn't exist anymore." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean it doesn't exist? They sealed it almost 40 years ago." I stared back into the darkness. The footsteps never stopped. "Then what's under there?" Victor whispered only 3 words. "Nobody knows anymore." The flashlight flickered again. This time the beam reached farther down the staircase. I saw old concrete steps covered in dust, except for one thing. Fresh footprints. They were wet, as though whoever had made them had just climbed out of deep water. The prints continued upward one by one. Another appeared, then another. Each footprint formed in front of my eyes without anyone visible making it. They were getting closer. One step below the doorway, then the next. I backed away until my shoulders hit the opposite wall. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to listen. Then the hospital lights went completely dark. Not just the East Wing. Everything. The emergency lights. The exit signs. Even my flashlight. Absolute darkness surrounded me. For several long seconds I couldn't see my own hand in front of my face. Then I heard breathing. Not human breathing. Long. Deep. Wet. It came from only a few feet away. Something slowly stepped onto the hallway floor. The sound of bare feet echoed across the tiles. One step. Another. Closer. Closer. My flashlight suddenly flashed for less than a second. That single flash was enough. A tall figure stood at the top of the basement stairs. Its hospital gown hung in wet strips from its body. Its arms were impossibly long, almost touching the floor. Its face had no eyes, only empty black holes staring directly at me. Then the light died again, and in complete darkness, I heard it whisper my name. Daniel. I stood frozen in complete darkness, unable to tell whether the thing had moved or whether it was still standing at the top of the basement stairs watching me. My breathing had become so loud that I could barely hear anything else. I forced myself to stay perfectly still, hoping that whatever had whispered my name relied on sound rather than sight. Seconds passed, maybe 20, maybe 60. Time had completely lost its meaning inside the East Wing. Then, without warning, the emergency lights flickered back to life. They didn't illuminate the hallway all at once. Instead, they lit one after another, beginning somewhere far behind me and slowly crawling forward like a wave. Every few feet, another light buzzed awake, throwing long shadows across the cracked floor. As the light reached the basement entrance, I looked toward the staircase. It was empty. The figure had vanished. There were only the wet footprints leading out of the darkness. They stopped exactly where I had been standing moments earlier. Nothing continued beyond that point. It was as if whoever had climbed those stairs had reached me, and then simply disappeared. I backed away from the basement entrance without taking my eyes off the footprints. My radio remained silent. Victor wasn't answering anymore. The inspection clipboard had somehow disappeared from my hand. I couldn't even remember dropping it. The only thing I still carried was my flashlight and the strange folder from the archive room tucked beneath my arm. I wanted nothing more than to get back upstairs, hand the folder to someone else, and walk out of St. Mercy forever. I turned toward the elevators. The hallway looked normal again. The endless stretching corridors were gone. Room numbers appeared in proper order. For the first time since entering the East Wing, I almost convinced myself that everything had simply been exhaustion. Maybe I had suffered some kind of panic attack. Maybe the old building was playing tricks on me. Then I reached the elevator. The call button was missing. Not broken. Not damaged. Gone. Only smooth painted concrete remained where it should have been. I stared at the wall in disbelief before checking the second elevator farther down the corridor. Its button had disappeared too. I tried pulling the doors apart with my hands. They didn't move. I pounded against the metal and shouted for help. My voice echoed through the empty hallway before fading into silence. Nobody answered. I looked toward the stairwell instead. The heavy fire door stood slightly open. Relief washed over me. At least I could climb back to the main floors. I pushed the door open and hurried inside. The staircase should have gone upward. Instead, the first thing I saw was another flight leading down. I frowned and climbed upward anyway. One floor, then another, then another. According to the numbers painted on the walls, I should have reached the ground floor after only 3 flights. Instead, the signs read something impossible. Level -4. I blinked. Maybe I had misread it. I climbed another flight. Level -5. A cold feeling settled into my stomach. I wasn't going up. Somehow, every step carried me deeper underground. I turned around immediately and started descending the stairs I had just climbed. After nearly a minute, I burst back through the fire door. The sign beside it read, East Wing, level -5. I stood there unable to breathe. The hospital had trapped me. Not metaphorically, physically. Every direction now led farther away from the surface. I walked into the hallway again. It no longer resembled the East Wing. The walls had become older. The paint had almost completely peeled away. Rust stained the ceiling. Water dripped steadily from exposed pipes overhead. The smell of mold filled the air. Hospital beds lined both sides of the corridor, each covered by yellowed sheets. Some beds still had restraints hanging from the rails. Others were stained dark brown beneath the fabric. Then I noticed something lying on one of the pillows. A flashlight. Mine. I instinctively looked down at my hand. I was still holding my flashlight. Slowly, very slowly, I approached the bed. The flashlight on the pillow wasn't just similar. Every scratch matched. Every piece of worn tape around the handle matched. Even the small crack near the lens was identical. It was my flashlight. I reached out. The moment my fingers touched it, every light in the hallway exploded at once. Glass rained across the floor. The corridor plunged into darkness again. And somewhere ahead of me, dozens of flashlights switched on simultaneously. One by one, hundreds of white beams appeared in the darkness, each one held by someone I couldn't yet see. They weren't searching for something. They were all pointed directly at me. Hundreds of flashlight beams remained fixed on me. None of them shook. None of them moved. They were held by complete darkness, making it impossible to see who carried them. I instinctively shielded my eyes with one arm, but it didn't help. The light was blinding. Then, one by one, silhouettes slowly stepped forward. At first I counted 5. Then 10, then 20. Eventually I stopped counting. The hallway was filled with security guards. Every one of them wore a different uniform. Some uniforms looked modern. Others belonged to decades long gone. A few wore faded jackets with hospital logos that hadn't existed for years. One guard still carried an old brass flashlight from the 1960s. Another held a wooden baton instead of a radio. Some looked young. Others looked old enough to have retired decades earlier. But every one of them had the same expression. Empty eyes. Pale faces. Complete silence. None of them blinked. None of them breathed. They simply watched me. I slowly stepped backward. Every guard stepped forward at the exact same moment. Only one step, nothing more. I stepped back again. They repeated the movement perfectly. Their boots struck the floor together with a single heavy thud that echoed through the corridor. I realized they weren't chasing me. They were hurting me, keeping me moving in one direction, toward the end of the hallway, toward another large steel door. Unlike the basement entrance, this one carried no warning signs, only a small brass plate that read, "Security Office." I frowned. There wasn't supposed to be another security office underground. The guards continued advancing. Slow, silent, patient. I had no choice. I turned the handle and stepped inside. The room looked almost identical to the security office upstairs. Same desks, same camera monitors, same lockers, same coffee machine. For a second, I actually smiled. Maybe I'd finally found a normal place. Then I noticed the calendar hanging beside the monitors. The year wasn't correct. It read 1989. I walked closer. Dust covered everything. Coffee cups sat half full on the desks. Papers remained scattered across the floor as if everyone had suddenly vanished in the middle of a shift. The camera monitors were still running. Every screen showed a different year. Camera 1, Camera 2, Camera 3, Camera 4, Camera 5. Tonight, I froze. The fifth monitor showed me standing inside the underground security office. Exactly where I was now. But something was wrong. The camera image wasn't live. The version of me on the screen wasn't standing still. He slowly turned his head, looked directly into the camera, then looked past it, at someone standing behind him. I felt my entire body go numb. The version of me on the monitor began backing away, his face filled with panic. He tried to scream. No sound came out. A pale hand slowly appeared on his shoulder. Long fingers, gray skin, the same hospital gown, the same thing from the basement. I spun around. Nobody. The office behind me was empty. I looked back at the monitor. The creature leaned close to the camera. Its mouth slowly opened wider than any human mouth could. Then every monitor switched to static. One sentence appeared across all of them at the same time. Next shift begins at 2:47 a.m. Before I could react, the office telephone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. I stared at it. It continued ringing. Finally, I picked up the receiver. For several seconds, there was only silence. Then I heard my own voice. Not similar. Exactly my voice. It sounded exhausted, broken, as though it had been whispering for days. It said only one sentence. "Daniel, whatever you do, don't answer the next call." The line went dead. At that exact moment, the telephone immediately began ringing again. The telephone kept ringing. I stared at it without moving, my own voice still echoing inside my head. "Whatever you do, don't answer the next call." The ringing continued, filling the underground security office with a sound that somehow became louder every second. It wasn't just coming from the receiver anymore. It echoed from the walls, from the ceiling, from somewhere inside the old camera monitors. I clenched my jaw and stepped away from the desk. I wasn't going to answer it. Whatever had spoken to me clearly wanted me to avoid that call. I took another step toward the office door. The ringing stopped instantly. The silence that followed felt even worse. Then every monitor switched on at exactly the same time. Every screen showed the same hallway outside the office. Except the hallway was empty. No me. No office door. No lights. Only darkness. I frowned and looked toward the real doorway. The corridor outside was still there. The emergency lights still flickered. The walls were still standing. I looked back at the monitors. The darkness on the screens slowly began moving. Not like shadows. Like something was walking through it. One monitor suddenly filled with static. Another followed. Then another. Within seconds, every screen had gone completely white with interference. A low humming sound filled the room. The static slowly disappeared. Every monitor now displayed the face of the same elderly security guard. His uniform looked at least 50 years old. His cap carried the St. Mercy logo, but it was a version I'd never seen before. He looked directly into the camera, then directly at me. His lips moved. The monitors had no sound. Still, I somehow understood exactly what he was saying. Run, the word repeated. Again, again, again. His expression changed. The fear in his eyes grew stronger with every repetition. Then, something grabbed him from behind. Not a hand, not an arm. Darkness itself. It wrapped around his shoulders like smoke before violently pulling him backward. He disappeared instantly. The monitor remained pointed toward the empty hallway. A few seconds later, blood slowly ran down the camera lens. Every monitor shut off. The office lights began flickering violently. The coffee mug sitting on the desk slid by itself across the wooden surface. Paper clips rolled toward the edge. The filing cabinet slowly opened. Drawer after drawer, one by one, old patrol reports spilled onto the floor. I knelt to grab one. The report was dated October 14th, 1989. Security Officer Michael Harris. I immediately recognized the name. My supervisor. The report was handwritten. 2:11 a.m. Motion detected in East Wing. 2:26 a.m. Basement door opened without alarm. 2:39 a.m. Unknown individual seen on camera 12. 2:47 a.m. The sentence stopped. Only a long black line crossed the rest of the page. I grabbed another report. Different handwriting. Different year. Same ending. 2:47 a.m. Black line. Another report. 2:47 a.m. Black line. Every single patrol report ended at exactly the same minute. No exceptions. Dozens. Hundreds. Maybe thousands. Then I found the newest report. Today's date. My name already written at the top. Security Officer Daniel Brooks. My hands immediately started shaking. The report wasn't blank. Someone had already filled it out. 2:41 a.m. Subject entered underground office. 2:44 a.m. Subject recovered archive file. 2:46 a.m. Subject became aware. The final line remained empty. Only the blinking cursor of an old typewriter sat waiting beside it. I slowly looked toward the desk. An ancient black typewriter stood there. Its keys began moving by themselves. One letter, then another. Metal striking paper echoed through the room. 2. Another key. Another. 4. Another. 7. I backed away. The machine continued typing. Every word appeared without anyone touching it. 2:47 a.m. Subject accepted night shift. The last key struck the paper so hard the entire desk shook. Then the typewriter stopped. A loud metallic buzz echoed somewhere beyond the office walls. It sounded like an old hospital intercom coming back online after decades of silence. A calm female voice filled every hallway underground. Attention security. There was a long pause. Your replacement has arrived. Then, someone knocked on the office door. 3 slow knocks. Exactly the same rhythm I had heard outside room 209. Knock, knock, knock. This time, the handle slowly began turning. The metal handle continued turning until it reached the very end. It stopped for only a second before the office door slowly creaked open by itself. I couldn't see anyone standing outside. The hallway beyond looked empty. The emergency lights continued flickering, throwing long shadows across the cracked floor. I stood perfectly still, waiting for someone to enter. Nobody did. The silence stretched on until I convinced myself that whatever had opened the door was gone. Then the office chair beside the main desk slowly rolled backward on its own. Not quickly, just enough to face the doorway. The old leather creaked as if someone invisible had just sat down. Before I could react, the computer monitor on the desk powered itself on. Unlike the modern monitors upstairs, this one was an old green monochrome screen. White letters slowly appeared across the black display. Welcome back, Night Shift Security. The cursor blinked for several seconds before another line typed itself. Please complete end of shift report. A keyboard sat beneath the monitor. Its keys began pressing themselves one after another. Name, Daniel Brooks. I stared in disbelief. Another line appeared. Status, active. Another. Replacement, pending. The blinking cursor stopped beside the final line. Time of acceptance. Nothing happened. The computer simply waited, as though expecting me to finish the report myself. My attention shifted toward the office walls. At first I hadn't noticed them because of the darkness. Every wall was covered with framed photographs, hundreds of them. Security guards standing in front of St. Mercy Hospital through every decade since the building first opened. Some photographs were black and white. Others had faded colors. The newest looked only a few years old. Every guard smiled at the camera. Every smile looked forced. Every pair of eyes carried the exact same exhaustion. I stepped closer to the nearest frame. Beneath each photograph was a small brass plate. Thomas Green, Night Shift, 1958 to 1961. The next, Arthur Collins, Night Shift, 1961 to 1967. Another, Michael Harris, Night Shift, 1989 to 2026. My heart nearly stopped. Michael hadn't retired. According to the plaque, his shift had lasted 37 years. I looked farther along the wall. The final empty frame stood alone. No photograph, no glass, only an engraved brass plate waiting beneath it. It already carried a name, Daniel Brooks. No dates, just my name. The office telephone suddenly rang again. This time I refused to answer. It rang 5 times before stopping. 5 seconds later, every telephone inside the office began ringing together. One on the main desk, another in the corner, another hanging beside the lockers, another I hadn't even noticed near the filing cabinets. Different ringtones, different volumes, all ringing together. The sound became unbearable. I covered my ears. It didn't help. The ringing seemed to come from inside my own head now. Then, every phone stopped simultaneously. A calm voice filled the office. Not through the speakers, through every telephone receiver at once. Daniel, you've done well. The voice sounded old, almost gentle. You've followed every step. You entered the East Wing. You opened the archive. You found the reports. You came downstairs. You accepted the office. Each sentence made my stomach tighten even more. I had never agreed to anything. I had spent the entire night trying to escape. The voice continued. Only one task remains. The monitor suddenly changed. Instead of text, it displayed a live security camera. The main hospital lobby. Nurses walked through the entrance. Doctors pushed patients on stretchers. Everything looked completely normal. Then the camera zoomed toward the front entrance. A young man wearing a brand new security uniform walked inside, carrying a flashlight and a clipboard. My breathing stopped. He looked exactly the way I had looked on my first night. Confused, a little nervous, trying to hide it. The camera followed him into the security office upstairs. Michael Harris appeared on the screen. He handed the young guard a flashlight, a radio, and a master keycard. Then I watched Michael say the exact same words he had once said to me. Whatever happens, don't ignore the radio. The young guard smiled, just like I had. The monitor displayed his personnel file. Ethan Parker, Night Shift Security. First shift, tonight. The old voice whispered one final sentence. You weren't the first, and you won't be the last. Then, someone quietly closed the office door behind me. The lock clicked. The lock echoed through the underground office with a sound that seemed far louder than it should have. I rushed to the door and grabbed the handle with both hands. It wouldn't move. I pulled harder until my shoulders ached. Nothing. The heavy steel door felt as though it had been welded shut from the outside. I slammed my fist against it again and again, shouting for anyone to hear me. My voice disappeared into the silence. No footsteps answered. No voices came from the hallway. It felt as if the rest of the hospital had simply ceased to exist. Behind me, the old computer monitor flickered once more. A new line slowly appeared beneath the previous report. Training complete. Another line typed itself. Please take your position. I stepped away from the screen. I'm not staying here. The room remained silent. Then every security camera switched on at once. Dozens of monitors. Dozens of live feeds. Every floor of St. Mercy Hospital appeared before me. The emergency room. The intensive care unit. The children's wing. The parking garage. Every camera showed normal hospital activity. Doctors working. Patients sleeping. Visitors waiting. Nothing unusual. Until I noticed something impossible. Every single camera contained one person wearing a security uniform. Me. On camera 1, I was walking through the emergency department. On camera 2, I was checking an exit door. On camera 3, I was speaking to a nurse. On camera 4, I stood beside an elevator. Every version of me looked calm, as though nothing strange had ever happened. I stared at the monitors in horror. Those couldn't be recordings. One version of me suddenly looked directly into his camera. He smiled. Then every other version did exactly the same. Dozens of Daniels, all smiling at once. Every monitor immediately went black. Only one camera remained active. It showed the underground office where I was standing. The image was perfectly live. I could see myself staring at the screens. Then, another figure slowly walked into frame behind me. I refused to turn around. I had learned my lesson. Every time I looked, it disappeared. Instead, I kept watching the monitor. The figure stopped only inches behind me. It slowly leaned forward. Its pale face finally became visible. My entire body froze. It wasn't a monster. It wasn't faceless anymore. It was me. Older. Much older. My hair had turned gray. Deep scars covered the left side of my face. Dark circles surrounded tired eyes that looked as though they hadn't slept in decades. The older version of me slowly smiled. Then, on the monitor, he reached into his pocket and removed something. An old brass security badge. The name engraved across it read, Daniel Brooks. Beneath my name, another engraving had been added, Night Shift Supervisor. The older me quietly placed the badge onto the desk. Then he finally spoke. not through the monitor, standing directly behind me. His voice sounded exactly like mine, only older, only completely exhausted. I fought it too. I ran. I destroyed the cameras. I burned the reports. I even tried to blow up this place. He paused. It always starts again. The hospital doesn't need ghosts. It needs witnesses. Slowly, very slowly, I turned around. For the first time, the figure didn't disappear. The older version of myself stood there under the flickering light. His eyes were filled with regret. He looked more tired than any human being I'd ever seen. He shook his head. "You're about to make the same mistake I did." Before I could answer, the office telephone rang again. This time, the older Daniel's face turned completely pale. He whispered only one sentence. "Don't let Ethan answer it." Then he vanished. Not by walking away, not by fading. He simply ceased to exist. The telephone kept ringing. Upstairs, a brand new security guard named Ethan Parker had just started his very first night shift. And for the first time since entering St. Mercy Hospital, I realized this nightmare wasn't about escaping. It was about stopping someone else from becoming the next me. The telephone continued ringing. Once, twice, 3 times. I didn't think. I grabbed the brass badge the older version of myself had left on the desk and sprinted toward the office door. The moment my fingers touched the handle, the lock clicked open by itself. I pulled the door open and ran into the hallway. The underground level had changed again. The walls looked newer. The water stains had vanished. The lights burned steadily overhead. It almost looked like a normal hospital. Almost. The silence was gone. Now I could hear voices. Doctors talking. Patients coughing. Stretchers rolling across tile floors. The sounds were coming from above. For the first time all night, the hospital sounded alive. I raced toward the stairwell. This time the stairs actually led upward. One floor, then another. The signs finally changed. Level -2. Then, level -1. My heart pounded with hope. I burst through the final fire door and found myself back inside the modern section of St. Mercy Hospital. Bright white walls, clean floors, nurses walking past. Everything looked completely normal. Nobody even looked at me, as if I hadn't just spent hours trapped underground. I rushed toward the main security office. The hallway felt familiar again. Every turn matched the building I had known for years. When I reached the office, the door stood open. Victor wasn't there. His chair slowly rotated back and forth by itself. The brand new flashlight that had been prepared for Ethan lay neatly on the desk. The telephone was still ringing. I looked around. "Ethan." No answer. The ringing stopped. A second later, I heard footsteps outside. I ran into the hallway. A young security guard walked toward me carrying a clipboard. He smiled politely. "You must be Daniel." I froze. It was Ethan, exactly as I had seen him on the monitor. He looked nervous, excited, completely unaware of what waited for him. "I've heard a lot about you," he said. "I guess you're finishing your shift." I grabbed his shoulder. "Listen to me." His smile disappeared. "What?" "No matter what happens tonight, do not go into the East Wing." He laughed nervously. "Is this some kind of rookie prank?" "I'm serious. If anyone asks you to check motion sensors, say no. If your radio calls you there, ignore it. If you hear someone calling your name, don't answer." Ethan stared at me for several seconds, then quietly asked, "Daniel, how did you know they already sent me there?" Every muscle in my body locked. "What?" He slowly reached into his pocket. He pulled out a folded inspection sheet. Across the top, I recognized the handwriting immediately. "Motion detected. East Wing. Immediate inspection required." Exactly the same report I had received. Before I could speak, Victor walked into the hallway behind Ethan. Except, something was wrong. His uniform looked brand new. His face looked younger. Far younger. At least 20 years younger than the Victor the first knew. He smiled warmly. "There you are." He looked at Ethan. "Ready for your first patrol?" Ethan nodded. Victor handed him a flashlight, a radio, and a master keycard. I watched the scene unfold exactly as I had seen it on the security monitor. Every word, every movement. Victor looked Ethan directly in the eyes, then calmly said, "Whatever happens, don't ignore the radio." My blood turned to ice. I stepped backward. "No." Victor slowly turned toward me. His smile never changed. For the first time, he acted as though he could actually see me. He tilted his head slightly, then quietly said, "You weren't supposed to remember." The lights throughout the hallway flickered once. Every nurse stopped walking. Every doctor froze. Every patient stood perfectly still. Hundreds of people, completely motionless. Only Victor continued smiling. Then, every person in the hallway slowly turned their heads toward me at exactly the same time. Every face in the hallway turned toward me at exactly the same moment. Hundreds of eyes locked onto mine without a single person saying a word. The silence became unbearable. Even the fluorescent lights stopped buzzing. It felt as though the hospital itself had taken a breath and was waiting to see what I would do next. Victor stood at the center of the hallway with the same calm smile on his face. Ethan looked confused, glancing between me and Victor as if he couldn't understand why everyone had suddenly frozen. I tried to speak, but no sound came out. My throat felt tight, almost as though invisible hands were squeezing it shut. Then every clock in the hallway clicked forward together. 2:47 a.m. The second hand stopped moving. Time froze. Victor slowly walked toward me. Every step echoed through the motionless hospital. He stopped only a few feet away and looked at me with something that almost resembled pity. "You still think this place wants to kill you?" He shook his head slowly. "It doesn't. It wants balance." I stared at him, unable to answer. "For more than 100 years," Victor continued, "someone has watched these halls every single night. Not because the hospital needs security." He looked around the frozen corridor. "Because something beneath this building must never be left alone." My heartbeat quickened. "The basement." Victor smiled. "It isn't a basement. It's a door." Before I could ask another question, the entire hospital shook violently. Ceiling tiles crashed onto the floor. Lights flickered wildly. Somewhere deep below us came a deafening metallic bang, followed by another and another, as if enormous steel doors were being struck from the other side. Victor closed his eyes. "It knows. It knows you're trying to leave." The lights suddenly went out. When they returned only a second later, every frozen doctor, nurse, and patient had disappeared. The hallway was completely empty. Only Victor, Ethan, and me remained. Then Ethan looked down at the inspection sheet still clutched in his hand. "The East Wing." He frowned. "I don't remember picking this up." Victor calmly reached out and took the paper from him. "You don't have to. I'll send Daniel instead." He turned toward me. His smile vanished completely. "You know the way now. I won't go back." "You already have." I said no. Victor slowly lifted his hand and pointed toward the security office. I followed his finger. The office door stood open. Inside, I saw myself. Not the older version. Not another hallucination. The real me, sitting calmly at the desk, watching the monitors, drinking coffee, completely unaware that I was standing in the hallway looking at him. I felt sick. The version inside the office suddenly looked up. He turned toward the hallway, toward me. Our eyes met. His face slowly filled with confusion, then fear. He stood up from the chair. At the exact same moment, I remembered, not imagined, remembered. I'd lived this before. Every conversation, every hallway, every knock, every impossible room. This wasn't the first loop, or the second. I'd forgotten each previous attempt. The hospital had simply started the night over again. Again, and again, and again. Victor quietly whispered, "Now you finally remember. And that's why. This is the first time you've ever had a chance to break the cycle." Daniel looked at Victor without blinking. "For years, you told me the hospital needed a night guard." Victor slowly nodded. "It does." "No." Daniel shook his head. "It needs a prisoner." Victor didn't answer. For the first time all night, his smile disappeared completely. Daniel noticed something he hadn't seen before. Victor looked exhausted, not simply tired, broken, like someone who had carried an impossible weight for decades. Victor quietly spoke. "You think I wanted this? I was exactly where you're standing now. I tried to save the man before me. I failed. I tried to burn the East Wing. It rebuilt itself. I called the police. They never found the basement. I quit. I woke up back inside the hospital the following night. Daniel slowly lowered the flashlight. So there's no escape. Victor looked down. I've never found one. The lights flickered violently. A deafening crash echoed somewhere beneath the building. The entire floor shook. Ceiling tiles crashed around them. Somewhere in the distance, something enormous roared. Not like an animal, not like a human. The sound vibrated through the walls themselves. Victor's face instantly changed. It woke up. Daniel looked toward the East Wing. The hallway had become completely black. Not because the lights were off, because darkness itself was slowly flowing out of the corridor. Like thick black smoke, it spread across the hospital floor. Wherever it touched, the walls began aging. Fresh paint cracked. Metal rusted. Hospital equipment crumbled into dust. Nurses, doctors, patients, everyone vanished as the darkness swallowed them. Only Daniel, Victor, and Ethan remained. Ethan finally looked terrified. What is happening? Victor grabbed Ethan by both shoulders. Listen to me. No matter what happens, you run. You do not stop. You never look back. Ethan stared at him. What about you? Victor smiled sadly. I've already had my turn. The darkness reached the center of the hallway. Inside it, hundreds of pale faces slowly appeared. Every missing security guard, every nurse, every doctor, every patient who had ever disappeared inside St. Mercy, all watching silently. Then, the thing finally stepped out. Daniel couldn't describe it. His mind refused to understand what he was seeing. Sometimes it looked like a patient, sometimes an old man, sometimes a child, sometimes something with impossibly long arms. Its shape never stopped changing. Only one thing remained constant: the empty black eyes. They locked directly onto Daniel. The creature spoke. Its voice wasn't loud, yet it echoed through the entire hospital. Another shift must begin. Victor slowly stepped forward. No. The creature stopped. Victor removed his old security badge, then quietly placed it on the floor. My shift ends. Daniel suddenly understood. No. Victor looked back one final time. You remembered. That's why you can still leave. I never could. The creature slowly reached toward Victor. Instead of resisting, Victor closed his eyes. I released the night shift. The hospital shook harder than ever before. Every window exploded. Every light burst. The darkness swallowed Victor completely. Then, silence. Absolute silence. The creature looked toward Daniel. For several endless seconds, neither of them moved. Then, the creature slowly disappeared back into the East Wing. The darkness retreated. The walls became normal again. The lights turned back on. Hospital sounds returned. Doctors walked through the corridors. Patients talked. Everything looked exactly as it had before. Except Victor was gone. Nobody remembered him. His office was empty. His name no longer existed in the employee database. Every photograph of him had disappeared. Only Daniel remembered. 3 months later, Daniel resigned from St. Mercy Hospital. He never worked another night shift again. Years passed. Sometimes he convinced himself it had all been a nightmare. Then, one rainy evening, his phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number. He answered. A young, nervous voice spoke. "Hello, my name is Ethan Parker. I work the night shift at St. Mercy Hospital." There was a long pause. Then Ethan quietly asked, "Daniel, have you ever heard knocking from room 209?